Hi, and welcome to this revision cast, where we are going to be looking at Paper 2, Question 3. This will be our first lesson on this language use question, an introduction to this question type, and also an introduction to the arrested techniques. So, here we've got two different ways of saying very much the same thing in the green and the pink boxes. Pause the video and answer the two connect questions. How are these writers trying to affect the reader? And which one do you think is more effective? What makes that writer more effective? Have you got an answer? If not, make sure that you pause the video to write down your answer first. Okay. So, possible answers that you might have written down. You might have said that these writers are trying to make us feel sympathy for the elephant. They're trying to make us feel badly for the elephant. And perhaps you've said something like the green one is more effective because it uses onomatopoeia like thwack and slam. And these can help us imagine the violence more strongly. Also, you might have noticed another thing, that the green one gives the elephant a name, which helps us build a personal connection and helps build that sense of empathy. Or perhaps you talked about different vocabulary, like sickening, flinches, the alliteration of savage strike. All great things to talk about, and all have to do with Paper 2, Question 3. Paper 2, Question 3 is very similar to Paper 1, Question 2, Language Use. They are both language use questions. For Paper 2, Question 3, you are going to explain how one of the sources, Source A or Source B, uses language to affect the reader, to influence the reader. This is a 12-mark question, whereas Paper 1, Question 2 was only an 8-mark question. So you're going to want to spend closer to 15 minutes on this question, instead of just the 10 minutes you might have spent on Paper 1, Question 2. With 12 marks, you should be looking to answer in 2 to 3 paragraphs instead of that 1 to 2 paragraphs for P1Q2. And you can answer these in PEE, point evidence explanation paragraphs, or even better, in Peter paragraphs. For these revision casts for Paper 2, Question 3, I'm going to go ahead and assume that you know how to write a Peter paragraph. If you're not quite sure about what Peter is, I would suggest you go back and rewatch the Paper 1, Question 2 revision casts, as well as the special Peter revision cast, so that you know how to write this essential paragraph type. If you are ever stuck when trying to answer a Paper 2, Question 3, I would suggest that you refer to a writing frame like this one. Now, you would not be allowed to bring a frame like this into the GCSE. You can't bring anything in, that's cheating, rather than your pen, of course. So I think it would be definitely worth your time to memorize this frame, so that you can make sure that you are easily and quickly able to pop up Peter paragraphs on the GCSE. On Paper 2, Question 3, you earn marks by doing the same thing that you do on Paper 1, Question 2, and on many other questions for that matter. You get marks for pointing out the writer's intent, what they're trying to do, by choosing good quotes as evidence, always using quotation marks, by identifying techniques by using the correct subject terminology, and by explaining the effect on the reader. Of course, being specific, this makes the reader interested, is too vague to earn any marks. Now, when we're talking about techniques, nonfiction writing uses some different techniques than you might see in fiction writing. So while you might see similes and metaphors and onomatopoeia on paper 2, you're much more likely to see arrested techniques on paper 2, question 3. Arrested techniques are these techniques: alliteration, rhetorical questions, repetition, emotive language, statistics, triples, exaggeration, and direct address. Alliteration is when you have words that start with the same sound, like this, starting same sound. And the effect of alliteration is that it highlights or emphasizes whatever is being alliterated. In the purple example here, we could say that perhaps the sweetness of grapes is being highlighted. And if you write about alliteration, be sure to explain why the writer thinks that's an important thing to highlight or emphasize. Rhetorical question is when you ask a question that doesn't get an answer. And the effect of this is always to make the reader consider the question, but also to imply a certain answer. And to get full marks when you're writing about rhetorical questions, you should write about what answer is implied to that question. For instance, this purple example here, perhaps we could say that this is implying that everybody loves grapes. Repetition. This is when you have something appear over and over and over again. And repetition, the effect is almost always to emphasize some aspect of the point that's being made. Emotive language. This is language that appeals to your emotions. So if you remember back when we were talking about imagery, what was imagery? Yeah, imagery was something that put an image in your head that made you imagine a certain image. Well, just like that, emotive language is language that makes you feel some kind of emotion. So when you're explaining emotive language, you're going to say that'll help the reader imagine or feel something. And you'll explain what and why the writer wants you to imagine or feel that. Statistics. These are specific researched numbers that you use to back up a point. Be careful, a statistic is not just any number. It's a number that is used as evidence and which somebody has had to research to find out. Now, statistics are almost always used as evidence to prove a certain point. So to explain them, you should explain what point those statistics are trying to prove. Statistics are also often used to impress the reader with something, maybe with how big or small that number is. So when you're explaining a statistic, you might want to say it's trying to impress the reader with how large or how small something is. Triplets. These are 3 reasons, 3 examples, 3 adjectives in a row. Anytime you've got 3 of something, it's catchy, it's memorable, and it draws the reader's attention to something. Be sure that you explain why. Exaggeration is when you have overstatement, especially when it's clearly done for effect. For instance, I've told you 1,000 times, or grapes aren't just the best fruit, they're the best thing money can buy. The effect of exaggeration is emphasis again. Now, the exaggeration itself is not literally true, but it's usually trying just to overemphasize something that might be true. If I say I've told you 1,000 times, I don't literally mean I have told you 990 times plus 10. I mean I've told you a lot of times. That's my point. And direct address, our final one. This is when you speak directly to the audience. This builds a personal connection with the audience and helps to emphasize a certain point. So, in the purple example, the writer is building a personal connection with the audience to try to emphasize how much the writer wants you to try grapes. And here are the arrested techniques again. So let's look at some real-world examples of them now. Here are 4 adverts. Each of them have at least one arrested technique. Take a moment and see if you can figure out which has which technique. Pause the video now. All right, did you find them? Here we've got a triple, milky, creamy, yummy. Also, we've got some emotive language, trying to make you imagine how delicious it is to eat that. More properly, we can call that sensory language that has to do with the sense of tastes. Now, you might have thought that milky, creamy, yummy with that e sound, those Y's, is alliteration. It's actually not. Alliteration is only at the beginning of words. If you want the proper name for the technique when it's at the middle or end, that is assonance. When you have a vowel sound that's being repeated across words. This one here for the lottery is a rhetorical question. It's also a direct address with your, and is emotive language, talking about dreams. And it could maybe be called exaggeration too, because it's kind of implying that playing the lottery will help you achieve your dreams. For the Cadbury cream egg in the bottom left, that's a direct address and a rhetorical question. How will you eat yours? Direct address, question mark, rhetorical question. The McDonald's one is a triplet. It's also alliteration, that b. It's also emotive language. Bliss means extreme happiness. You could perhaps call it repetition because we're repeating that full stop, single word sentences. And you could perhaps say it's exaggeration. McDonald's cheeseburger does not help you achieve the perfect happiness of bliss. Here are 3 more. Again, pause the video, see what techniques you can find. All right, have you found them? Well, let's see. Top left one, Chipotle, has a triplet. It's also got repetition, repeating that sentence. It's also got exaggeration because they're probably not literally obsessing over every single ingredient. Top right, UNICEF, that is direct address. We, you and me, are not. And emotive language, he is starving. It's time to share. Bottom left, you've got direct address and statistics, 80%. And bottom right, we've got a lot. We've got a triplet, fresh, fun, filling. That triplet's also alliteration. We've got emotive language, fantastic moments, direct address, filling you, and exaggeration, because it's an ad for water, and water does not actually fill you with fantastic moments. So, you can identify those techniques, but how would we write about them? How would we write about techniques that we might find in here? Well, we could just say this. The writer uses emotive language when she says sickening thwack. But that's not quite a good answer. What's missing? Okay, first of all, we can embed the quote to make the quote make more sense. We could also give an effect on the reader, but this still isn't a good answer. Why isn't that a good answer? Well, yeah, explanation here is too vague to actually earn any marks. This would be an example of a good answer. The writer uses emotive language with a sickening thwack of the pitchfork hitting the elephant, showing us how abused the elephant is. The onomatopoeia word thwack highlights the force of the violence the elephant suffers every day. This makes the reader feel sympathy for the poor abused animal. And so you can see we're saying what the writer's point is. We've got a quote. We've got some techniques, 2 of them, emotive language and onomatopoeia. We've got effect on the reader. In fact, a good response includes all of the points of Peter.